Raymond Cole pushed open the bathroom door at 2 in the morning. The fluorescent light buzzed to life. He froze. A woman in a wedding dress stood pressed against the corner between the bathtub and the cracked tile wall. Barefoot, mascara bleeding down her cheeks, the silk gown torn at the hem and streaked with grime. She raised one trembling hand toward him. Her voice cracked through the silence. "Please, don't tell anyone I'm here." The scent of her expensive perfume clashed with the bleach still clinging to his fingers from the night shift. Raymond's pulse hammered in his ears. His first thought was of his 6-year-old daughter asleep down the hall. But the desperation in this stranger's eyes stopped him cold. Not fear of him. Fear of something hunting her. Something that had already stripped away everything except that ruined dress and the raw terror in her voice. What she would whisper in the coming days wouldn't just expose the conspiracy threatening a billion-dollar empire. It would destroy every wall Raymond had built between his world and hers. Raymond had left the downtown office building at 1:15, the same time he left every night. He'd mopped the executive floors, emptied trash bins that cost more than his monthly rent, and scrubbed toilets used by people who wouldn't look him in the eye. The job paid just enough to keep the lights on in the small rental house he shared with Zoe. Tonight, he'd stopped at the 24-hour convenience store on Maple Street, counting coins to buy bread and milk for tomorrow's breakfast. The cashier had given him that look, the one that said she knew he was counting every penny. Raymond had smiled anyway, thanked her, and walked the 6 blocks home because the bus didn't run this late. The house was dark when he arrived, just the small nightlight glowing from Zoe's room. He'd checked on her first, like he always did. She was curled up under her worn butterfly blanket, clutching the stuffed bear that used to belong to her mother. Raymond had stood in the doorway for a moment, watching her chest rise and fall. At 6 years old, Zoe still asked when Mommy was coming back from heaven. At 38, Raymond still didn't know how to answer that question. Melanie had been gone for 3 years, taken by cancer that moved faster than any of them could process. He'd quit his job at the accounting firm to take care of her during those final months. After she passed, the only work he could find with his hours was custodial work. Night shifts meant he could be home when Zoe woke up. He'd set the groceries on the kitchen counter and headed for the bathroom, planning to wash the night's grime off before collapsing into bed. That's when he pushed open the door and found her. Now Raymond stood in his own bathroom, staring at a stranger in a wedding dress who looked like she'd run through hell to get here. Her hair, clearly styled hours ago, hung in tangled waves. Dirt smudged her collarbone. One of her sleeves was torn at the shoulder. The dress itself must have cost thousands. He could tell by the fabric, the way it caught the light, even covered in filth. But the woman wearing it looked like she was about to shatter. Raymond kept his voice low, conscious of Zoe sleeping down the hall. "How did you get in here?" The woman flinched at his words, but didn't move from the corner. Her eyes darted to the small window above the bathtub, then back to him. "Your back door," she whispered. "It was unlocked. I'm sorry. I didn't know where else to go." Raymond cursed himself silently. He'd taken out the trash earlier and must have forgotten to lock it. In this neighborhood, that was asking for trouble. But this woman wasn't a burglar. Everything about her screamed money and privilege, except for the terror etched into every line of her face. "Who's after you?" he asked. She shook her head, fresh tears cutting tracks through her makeup. "Please, I just need somewhere to hide. Just tonight. Then I'll go. I promise." Raymond should have called the police right then. He should have woken the neighbors, done something other than stand there with bleach under his fingernails, looking at a woman who clearly didn't belong in his world. But there was something about her eyes, a desperate plea that reminded him of Melanie in those final days, when she'd begged him not to give up on her. He'd failed his wife. He couldn't save her. Maybe that's why he heard himself say, "One night." But if anything seems wrong, if I think you're putting my daughter in danger, you're out. Clear?" The woman's shoulders sagged with relief. "Thank you. God, thank you." She tried to step forward and stumbled. Raymond caught her elbow, steadying her. Up close, he could see her feet were bleeding, cut from running barefoot on pavement. "You're hurt." She glanced down as if noticing for the first time. "It's nothing." "It's not nothing. Wait here." Raymond went to the kitchen, keeping his ears tuned to any sound from Zoe's room. He grabbed the first aid kit from under the sink and returned to find the woman had sunk down onto the closed toilet lid. She looked smaller now, less like an intruder, and more like someone's daughter who'd run from something terrible. He knelt and cleaned the cuts on her feet, working quickly and quietly. She winced, but didn't make a sound. "I'm Raymond," he said finally. "Raymond Cole." The woman hesitated, then spoke so softly he almost missed it. "Camille. Camille Blackwood." The name meant nothing to him. He didn't follow business news or high society gossip. He spent his days with Zoe and his nights cleaning buildings. But the way she said her last name, like it was both a burden and a shield, told him it mattered. "Okay, Camille Blackwood, you can sleep on the couch tonight. Tomorrow morning, you tell me what's really going on. Deal?" Camille nodded, wrapping her arms around herself. The wedding dress rustled with the movement, a ghost of whatever celebration she'd fled from. Raymond found an old blanket and a pillow, set them on the worn sofa in the living room. "Bathroom's there if you need it. Kitchen's through here. Don't touch anything in my daughter's room." He paused at the hallway entrance. "And Camille? Whatever you're running from, I hope it's worth the risk you're taking by staying here." She looked up at him with those desperate eyes. "It is. Trust me. It is." Raymond didn't sleep that night. He sat in the armchair across from the couch, watching Camille as she finally drifted off sometime around 4. Every time a car passed outside, she'd jerk awake, eyes wide with panic before remembering where she was. He studied her face in the dim light, the expensive bone structure, the designer dress even in ruins, the kind of beauty that came from generations of good breeding and better nutrition. She didn't belong here. And yet here she was, in his living room, running from something that scared her more than hiding in a stranger's house. As dawn broke through the thin curtains, Raymond finally closed his eyes. Whatever storm Camille had brought to his doorstep, it was too late to turn back now. Zoe's footsteps woke him at 6:30. Raymond jerked upright, momentarily disoriented, then remembered. He looked at the couch. Camille was sitting up, the blanket pulled tight around her shoulders, staring at his daughter. Zoe stood in the hallway entrance, wearing her favorite pajamas covered in cartoon stars, her dark curls wild from sleep. Her eyes were fixed on Camille, wide with wonder. "Daddy," Zoe whispered, her voice full of awe. "There's a princess in our living room." Raymond moved quickly, positioning himself between them. "Zoe, baby, go back to your room for a minute. Daddy needs to talk to you." But Zoe didn't move, still staring at Camille. "Why is she here? Is she lost?" Camille's expression softened, something shifting behind her eyes. She managed a small smile. "Yes, sweetheart. I'm a little lost." Zoe tilted her head, studying Camille with the intense scrutiny only children possess. "Your dress is dirty. Did you fall down?" Something like that. Camille's voice cracked slightly. Raymond saw her swallow hard, fighting for composure. "Zoe," he said gently, "let's go to your room and talk about this." His daughter finally looked at him, and he saw the question in her eyes, the same question she'd been asking in different ways since Melanie died. "Is someone going to leave us again?" In Zoe's room, surrounded by stuffed animals and crayon drawings, Raymond knelt to his daughter's level. "The lady's name is Camille. She needed a safe place to stay for the night. She's going to leave soon. But while she's here, I need you to be polite and quiet, okay? Zoe nodded slowly. Is she nice? Raymond thought about the terror in Camille's eyes, the way she'd flinched at every sound. I think she's scared. And when people are scared, they need kindness. Can you help me be kind to her? Zoe's face brightened. Like when Mrs. Chen brings us soup when we're sick. Exactly like that. Raymond kissed his daughter's forehead. Now, let's get you some breakfast. Can the princess eat with us? When they returned to the living room, Camille was standing by the window, peering through the curtain at the street outside. She turned quickly when she heard them, her body tense. Raymond noticed she'd positioned herself where she could see both the front door and the window, like someone expecting an attack. Camille, he said carefully, this is my daughter, Zoe. Zoe insisted you join us for breakfast. Camille's eyes moved from him to Zoe, then back. I don't want to impose. You're already here, Raymond pointed out. Might as well eat. In the kitchen, Raymond made pancakes, while Zoe chattered about her stuffed animals and her friend Lucy from next door. Camille sat at the small table, still wrapped in the blanket, watching them with an expression Raymond couldn't quite read. It looked almost like hunger, but not for food. More like she was starving for something she'd never had. When he set the plate in front of her, she stared at it for a long moment. I can't remember the last time someone made me breakfast, she said quietly. Zoe climbed into the chair next to Camille. Don't you have a daddy to make you breakfast? Camille's smile was sad. My parents died when I was young. I have a sister, but she's usually busy. Oh. Zoe considered this seriously. That's sad. You can share my daddy. He makes the best pancakes. Something flickered across Camille's face. Pain, longing, grief. Raymond couldn't tell. She looked down at her plate, and he saw her hands were shaking. Hey, Raymond said softly. When you're ready, we need to talk. About why you're really here. Zoe had finished eating and gone to her room to get dressed when Camille finally spoke. She sat with her hands wrapped around a mug of coffee Raymond had made, staring into the dark liquid like it held answers. My name is Camille Blackwood. My family owns Blackwood Industries. We manufacture medical equipment, surgical tools, diagnostic machines, that kind of thing. The company's worth about $3 billion. Raymond set down his own coffee carefully. $3 billion. He made $19,000 a year. Okay, he said, keeping his voice neutral. I was supposed to get married yesterday. To Preston Whitmore. He's a businessman. Someone I've known since college. We've been engaged for 2 years. Camille took a shaky breath. The night before the wedding, I couldn't sleep. I went downstairs in the hotel. We'd rented out the entire top floor for the wedding party, and I heard Preston talking to someone in one of the conference rooms. I recognized the voice. Thomas Harrington. He's a lawyer, someone Preston had brought on to help with some company contracts. She paused, her knuckles white around the mug. I stood outside the door and listened. They were talking about what would happen after the wedding, about how Preston would use the prenuptial agreement to gradually take control of my shares in the company, about how he'd have me declared mentally incompetent within a year, how they'd spin it to the board, to the media, how he'd finally have what he'd spent 5 years working toward. Raymond felt cold spread through his chest. You're saying he was planning to steal your company. Not steal, legally take it. The prenup was written in a way that looked protective of me, but it had clauses, loopholes, that would give Preston control if certain conditions were met. And those conditions were all things he could manufacture: a breakdown, an incident that questioned my judgment, medical records from doctors he'd already bought off. Camille's voice was shaking now. I trusted him. For 5 years, I trusted him. I thought he loved me. She set down the coffee, wrapped her arms around herself. I didn't know what to do. Who could I tell? Preston's been integrated into every part of the company, every part of my life. Our lawyers are his friends. Half the board plays golf with him. I ran. I grabbed my dress and I ran. I didn't even have shoes. They were still in the hotel room. I just ran. Raymond processed this, connecting pieces. How did you end up here? I didn't know where to go. I couldn't go home. Preston knows all my properties. I couldn't go to friends. They're all connected to him. I just ran through the streets until I saw your house. The light was on. I tried the back door and it opened, and I hid in the first room I could find. Raymond leaned back in his chair. You need to call the police. Report this. With what evidence? A conversation I overheard? Preston's smart, Raymond. He's been planning this for years. Everything he's done is technically legal. The prenup is signed. The medical experts are real doctors. Even if I report what I heard, it's his word against mine. And right now, everyone thinks I've had a breakdown. I left my own wedding. By tomorrow, Preston will have convinced everyone I'm unstable. Camille looked at him with those desperate eyes again. I need time. I need to figure out how to fight this. But I need somewhere to hide first. Raymond thought about his daughter sleeping down the hall, about the quiet life they'd built together, humble but safe, about how inviting Camille to stay would shatter that safety like glass. But he also thought about Melanie, about how she'd fought until she had nothing left to fight with, about how sometimes the right thing to do was the hardest thing. 2 days, he said finally. You can stay for 2 days while you figure out your next move. But Camille, I need you to understand something. I have a 6-year-old daughter who's already lost her mother. If staying here puts her at risk in any way, you're gone. I don't care about your company or your conspiracy. Zoe comes first. Always. Camille nodded, tears spilling over. I understand. Thank you. You don't know what this means. The first day passed in strange domesticity. Raymond called Mrs. Chen and asked if she could watch Zoe for a few hours. He had some things to take care of at home. The elderly neighbor agreed without questions. Once Zoe was gone, Raymond found old clothes that had belonged to Melanie, offered them to Camille. She emerged from the bathroom in jeans and a sweater that hung loose on her frame, her face scrubbed clean of makeup. Without the designer dress and professional styling, she looked younger, more vulnerable, almost like a different person. The wedding dress, Raymond said. We should probably hide it, if someone's looking for you. Camille nodded. Together they stuffed the ruined gown into a trash bag and buried it at the bottom of the outside bin. Camille moved through his house like a ghost, touching things carefully as if they might break. She studied the photos on the wall, Raymond and Zoe at the park, Zoe's kindergarten picture, one faded photo of Melanie holding their newborn daughter. Your wife was beautiful, Camille said quietly. She was. Raymond stood beside her, looking at Melanie smile. She died 3 years ago. Cancer. I'm sorry. Me too. They stood in silence for a moment. What was she like? Raymond considered the question. Strong. Stronger than me. She worked as a nurse, loved helping people. When she got sick, she fought harder than anyone I've ever seen. Right up until the end, she was more worried about Zoe and me than herself. He turned to look at Camille. She would have helped you. Melanie had this thing about standing up to bullies. She wouldn't have cared about the risk. That evening, when Zoe came home, she found Camille sitting on the living room floor and immediately plopped down beside her. Want to see my drawings? Before Camille could answer, Zoe was pulling out her art folder, showing page after page of crayon masterpieces. Camille studied each one seriously, asking questions, pointing out details. Raymond watched from the kitchen as he prepared dinner. Nothing fancy, just spaghetti and sauce from a jar. But he saw something shift in Camille's expression. a loosening of the tension that had held her rigid since she'd arrived. When Zoe laughed at something Camille said, he saw Camille's face transform into something approaching peace. Over dinner, Zoe asked questions with the blunt curiosity of childhood. "Why don't you have your own house to stay at?" "It's complicated, sweetie. Are you hiding from bad guys like in movies?" Camille glanced at Raymond, uncertain. He gave a small nod. "Something like that," Camille admitted. Zoe absorbed this with perfect seriousness. "Don't worry. My daddy's really brave. He'll protect you." Raymond felt his throat tighten. Camille's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I'm sure he will," she managed. After Zoe went to bed, Raymond and Camille sat in the living room, the television off, the house quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. "She's wonderful," Camille said. "You've done an amazing job with her." "I'm doing my best. Some days that feels like barely enough." Raymond rubbed his face tiredly. "You said you have a sister. Can you trust her?" Camille was quiet for a long moment. "Vivian. She's 3 years older than me. After our parents died, she wanted to run the company, but the board chose me instead. I was younger, more moldable, I guess. Vivian stepped back, said she'd support my decisions. But there's always been this distance between us. I never knew if it was resentment or just her personality." She paused. "But yes, if anyone would help me, it's Vivian. She hates Preston. Always has." Raymond pulled out his old laptop, the one he'd bought used 3 years ago and barely knew how to use beyond basic email. "Can you contact her without Preston knowing?" Camille thought, then nodded. "I have an old email account, something I set up in college that Preston doesn't know about, if I can access it." Raymond slid the laptop across to her. Camille's fingers flew over the keyboard with practiced ease, pulling up encryption sites and anonymous browsers that Raymond had never heard of. After 20 minutes, she leaned back. "I sent her a message, just said I was safe and needed her help. If she checks that old account, and I think she will, she's always been paranoid about keeping communication channels open. She'll know it's really me." They waited. Raymond made coffee. Camille paced the small living room, wearing a path in his carpet. Finally, at nearly midnight, the laptop pinged. Camille lunged for it, read the response, and let out a shaky breath. "She wants to video call. Tomorrow at noon. Is that okay?" Raymond nodded. "I'll take Zoe to the park. You'll have privacy." Camille looked at him with something close to wonder. "Why are you doing this? You don't know me. My problems aren't your problems." Raymond thought about that, about the woman in the wedding dress trembling in his bathroom, about Zoe calling her a princess, about Melanie's voice in his head saying, "Do the right thing." "Maybe not," he said. "But they're somebody's problems, and that somebody needed help. It's not complicated." The next morning, Raymond watched Camille transform. She borrowed his laptop again, researching, making notes, her expression shifting from scared refugee to something harder, more focused. This was the CEO, he realized, the woman who ran a $3 billion company. She moved differently now, sat straighter, spoke with crisp authority when she tested the video connection. When noon approached, Raymond took Zoe to the small park 3 blocks away. His daughter played on the swings while he sat on a bench, wondering what storm he'd invited into their lives. When they returned an hour later, Camille was sitting very still at the kitchen table, her face pale but determined. "Vivian's going to help," she said. "She's been suspicious of Preston for months, apparently. She started her own investigation, has her own lawyer looking into the prenup and Preston's business dealings. She's found some things. Money transfers that don't add up. Connections to companies that don't exist. It's not enough yet, but it's a start." Raymond set Zoe up with her coloring books in the living room and returned to the kitchen. "What does that mean for you?" "It means I can't hide here forever. I need to go back, face this. But not yet. Not until Vivian has solid evidence. She says to give her 3 days. Camille looked at Raymond. I know you said 2 days. I know I'm asking too much. But if I surface now, before we have proof, Preston wins. He'll spin this as a breakdown. Everything I've built will be his. Raymond thought about his daughter, about the risks, about the quiet life he'd tried to build. Then he thought about Camille's face when Zoe had shown her those drawings, the way she'd looked almost human for the first time. 3 more days, he said. But we need rules. You don't go near the windows. You stay inside. If anyone comes to the door, you hide. And if anything feels wrong, you tell me immediately. Those 3 days reshaped something in Raymond's house. Camille proved surprisingly useful. She insisted on cooking meals, though she admitted she'd never really learned how. Her attempts at breakfast resulted in burned eggs and smoking toast that made Zoe giggle. But she kept trying, and by the 2nd day, she managed passable pancakes. She helped Zoe with a school project about family trees, carefully drawing branches and adding leaves, while his daughter chattered about her teacher and her friends. Raymond came home from his night shift each morning to find them already awake, Camille reading Zoe stories or playing simple games with cards they'd found in a drawer. On the 3rd night, after Zoe was asleep, Camille and Raymond sat in the kitchen sharing the pot of coffee he'd made for his shift. I've been thinking, Camille said slowly, about what Preston said, about how he'd been working toward this for 5 years. She looked at Raymond. That means from the very beginning, from the first time he asked me out in college, it was all a lie. Every date, every conversation, every time he said he loved me, all calculated. Do you know what that feels like? To realize someone studied you, learned exactly how to make you trust them, just to steal from you? Raymond thought about the loneliness in her voice. I can't imagine. But I know what it's like to lose someone you thought you'd spend your life with. When Melanie died, I lost my future. Everything we'd planned, everything we'd dreamed about, gone. You lost something different but just as real. The person you thought Preston was, he never existed. You're grieving someone who wasn't even real. Camille's eyes filled with tears. How do you move on from that? You take it one day at a time. You find small things to hold on to. For me, it was Zoe. Every morning she'd wake up and need me, and that need gave me purpose. You'll find your purpose again. Maybe it's saving your company. Maybe it's something else entirely. But you'll find it. They sat in comfortable silence until Camille spoke again. Can I tell you something? Something I haven't told anyone, not even Vivian. Raymond nodded. These past 3 days, staying here with you and Zoe, it's the most normal I've felt in years. Maybe ever. Growing up, my sister and I were raised by boarding schools and nannies after our parents died. The company was always the priority. When I took over as CEO, it consumed everything. I worked 18-hour days, 7 days a week. I told myself it was because I loved the work. But really, I think I just didn't know how to be anything else. I didn't know how to be a person who makes pancakes or reads bedtime stories or plays card games. I didn't know this kind of life existed. Raymond studied her in the dim kitchen light. This isn't some fantasy, Camille. This is hard work and barely making rent and worrying constantly about money. You're seeing it through a filter because you're hiding here. But this life, it grinds you down. I know, she said softly, but at least you have something real. Zoe knows you love her. When she looks at you, there's no doubt, no calculation, no wondering what you want from her. That's worth more than every dollar in my company's accounts. Raymond couldn't argue with that. When this is over, when you go back to your life, you'll forget this. You'll forget us. You'll be back in board meetings and fancy restaurants, and this will seem like a strange dream. Camille reached across the table, placed her hand over his. Her fingers were warm, softer than his calloused hands. "I won't forget," she said firmly. "I promise you, Raymond Cole. I won't forget what you and Zoe gave me, even if it was only for a few days." Something passed between them in that moment. Not romance, not yet, but recognition. Two people from impossibly different worlds who'd found unexpected common ground. Raymond pulled his hand back gently, aware they were crossing lines that couldn't be uncrossed. "You should sleep. Tomorrow's the 4th day. Time for answers." The next morning, Vivian sent the message they'd been waiting for. She had everything she needed. Financial records showing Preston had embezzled money from shell companies he'd created using Blackwood Industries accounts. Emails between Preston and Thomas Harrington discussing the exact timeline of taking over the company. Even a recorded phone call where Preston bragged to an associate about his plan. It was enough. More than enough. Camille sat at the laptop, reading through the evidence, her expression hardening with each page. When she finally looked up at Raymond, she was transformed again. The frightened woman in the wedding dress was gone. This was Camille Blackwood, CEO, ready for war. "I have to go back," she said. "Today. Vivian scheduled a press conference for this afternoon. I need to be there." Raymond felt something twist in his chest, relief mixed with an unexpected disappointment. "Good. That's good. You'll get your company back." Zoe appeared in the doorway, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "Is Camille leaving?" Her voice was small, sad. Camille knelt down, pulling Zoe into a hug. "I have to, sweetheart, but I'll never forget you. You and your daddy, you're the bravest people I've ever met." Zoe's arms tightened around Camille's neck. "Will you come back and visit?" Camille looked over Zoe's shoulder at Raymond, question in her eyes. He nodded slowly. "Maybe," Camille told Zoe. "Maybe I will." Vivian arrived in an unmarked car an hour later. She was tall, elegant, with Camille's bone structure but sharper edges. She took in Raymond's house with one sweeping glance, then focused on her sister. "We need to move. Preston's been spinning a story about you having a breakdown. We're going to burn that story to the ground. But we need you front and center." Camille gathered the few things she had. Melanie's borrowed clothes, which she promised to return. At the door, she turned back to Raymond and Zoe. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "For everything. I'll never—" "We know," Raymond interrupted gently. "Go fight your fight." He watched through the window as the car pulled away, taking Camille back to her world of billions and boardrooms and battles he couldn't imagine. Zoe pressed against his side. "I miss her already, Daddy." "Me too, baby." And he did, Raymond realized with surprise. In just 4 days, Camille Blackwood had become something more than a stranger in his bathroom. She'd become a reminder that courage came in many forms, that strength wasn't about money or power, but about standing up when everything told you to stay down. He'd taught her about normal life. Maybe she'd taught him something too, that even a janitor could matter, that helping someone wasn't about what you got in return. For 2 days, Raymond tried to return to normal life. He worked his night shifts, came home to make Zoe breakfast, took her to school, slept when he could. But he found himself checking news sites on his old laptop, searching for any mention of Camille or Blackwood Industries. Nothing. Then, on the 3rd day, it exploded across every news outlet. Camille Blackwood had held a press conference announcing the cancellation of her wedding to Preston Whitmore and revealing evidence of his attempted corporate espionage and embezzlement. The footage showed Camille in a sharp business suit, her hair perfect, her voice steady as she detailed Preston's 5-year plan to steal her company. She presented financial records, emails, recorded conversations. The evidence was damning and thorough. Preston tried to fight back with his own press conference that evening. Raymond watched on his small television as Preston claimed Camille had fabricated everything, that she was unstable and grieving the end of their relationship. He painted himself as a victim of a vindictive woman who couldn't handle rejection. The media loved the drama. Billionaire heiress versus her spurned fiancé. Opinion pieces debated who was telling the truth. Then Preston made his fatal mistake. He released photos, grainy surveillance images that showed Camille in Raymond's neighborhood, walking with Zoe in the small park, sitting on Raymond's front steps. Images taken by a private investigator Preston had clearly hired to track her. Camille Blackwood spent the week hiding in the home of a janitor, Preston announced, his smile sharp and cruel. A man named Raymond Cole, who lives in a rental house and works cleaning toilets. This is the judgment of the woman you're supposed to trust to run a billion-dollar company. She abandoned her responsibilities to play house with some nobody. Raymond's phone started ringing immediately. Reporters outside his house, shouting questions. News vans parked on his street. Neighbors staring. Mrs. Chen called, worried, asking if Zoe was safe. Raymond assured her everything was fine, but his hands shook as he hung up. This was exactly what he'd feared. Zoe came out of her room, frightened by the noise outside. "Daddy, what's happening?" He pulled her close. "Just some people being silly, baby. It's going to be okay." But he wasn't sure it was. Then his doorbell rang. Raymond looked through the peephole and froze. Camille stood on his front step, surrounded by reporters, cameras flashing like lightning. She looked directly at the door, directly at where she must have known he was watching. Steady. Certain. Raymond took a breath and opened the door. The noise hit him like a wave, dozens of voices shouting questions. "Mr. Cole, what's your relationship with Camille Blackwood? Did you know who she was? Are you involved in the scandal?" Raymond ignored them all, his eyes only for Camille. She stepped forward, and the cameras went wild. "I need to make a statement," Camille said, her voice carrying over the chaos. She turned to face the reporters, the cameras, the world. "Raymond Cole is a good man who helped a stranger in need. When I had nowhere else to turn, when I was frightened and alone, he opened his door and asked for nothing in return. He gave me a safe place to think, to plan, to remember what it means to be human instead of a corporate asset." Her voice grew stronger, more forceful. "Preston Whitmore is trying to paint Mr. Cole as some kind of scandal because he can't attack the evidence I've presented. He wants you to focus on where I stayed instead of what he did. He wants you to think that a janitor isn't worthy of basic human kindness, that somehow helping someone in need is shameful because that person doesn't have enough money or the right job title." Camille's eyes found Raymond's. "But I'm here to tell you something. Raymond Cole is worth 100 Preston Whitmores. He's a single father who works night shifts to provide for his daughter. He's a widower who chose kindness when he could have chosen safety. He's a man who taught me more about integrity in 4 days than I learned in 4 years at business school." She turned back to the cameras. "And yes, I have feelings for him. I won't apologize for that. I won't hide it. In the darkest moment of my life, Raymond Cole was a light. If Preston thinks that makes me unfit to run my company, then he never understood what leadership actually means." The reporters erupted with questions, but Camille held up her hand. "One more thing. The police arrested Preston Whitmore an hour ago. The FBI has taken over the investigation into his embezzlement scheme. The evidence we turned over shows he stole over $50 million from Blackwood Industries through shell companies, planned to take complete control of the company through fraudulent means, and attempted to have me committed to a psychiatric facility against my will. Those are facts, supported by documents, recordings, and testimony. Everything else is just noise." She looked at Raymond again. "I'm sorry I brought this to your door. I never meant for you to be dragged into this mess." Raymond stepped forward, ignoring the cameras, the microphones, the chaos. He spoke quietly, just to her. "Are you okay?" Camille's professional mask cracked slightly. "I will be. Thanks to you." "The offer stands," Raymond said. "If you need somewhere to hide again, our door's open." Her smile was real this time, reaching her eyes. "I might take you up on that." Then she did something Raymond didn't expect. She stood on her toes and kissed his cheek. Right there, in front of all the cameras. "Thank you, Raymond Cole, for seeing me when I was invisible, for treating me like a person instead of a corporation, for showing me what really matters." The reporters went insane, but Raymond barely heard them. He watched Camille walk back to the sleek black car waiting at the curb, watched her pause at the door, and waved to Zoe, who'd appeared in the window. Then she was gone, and Raymond was left standing on his doorstep, facing a wall of cameras and questions he had no interest in answering. He went back inside, locked the door, and pulled Zoe into his arms. "Is Camille in trouble?" Zoe asked. "No, baby. Camille's going to be just fine. She's strong." "Are you sad she left again?" Raymond thought about that. "A little. But I'm happy she's fighting back." That's what matters. The media circus lasted 3 more days. Raymond's face was on news websites, his name in articles about the Blackwood scandal. His co-workers at the janitorial company looked at him differently, some with respect, some with suspicion, all with curiosity he had no interest in satisfying. Mrs. Chen brought over meals, worried he wasn't eating properly under all the stress. Zoe got used to walking past reporters on the way to school, learned to ignore the cameras. Raymond just put his head down and kept living, the way he always had. A week after the press conference, the story finally started to die down. Preston Whitmore was formally charged with embezzlement, fraud, and attempted wrongful commitment. The evidence was overwhelming. His lawyers tried every trick, but the facts were simple and brutal. He'd spent 5 years working his way into Camille's life and her company with one goal: steal everything. The courts froze his assets. His business partners abandoned him. The media that had once loved him turned on him with savage glee. He became a cautionary tale about greed and deception. Camille didn't contact Raymond during this time. He understood. She was fighting for her company, for her reputation, for everything Preston had tried to take. She didn't have time for the janitor who'd given her shelter. Raymond told himself he was fine with that. Their worlds had collided for a moment, but now things were back to normal. She was a billionaire CEO. He cleaned offices at night. That was reality. Except Zoe kept asking when Camille would visit. Except Raymond kept thinking about their conversations in his kitchen, about the way she'd looked at his small, humble life like it was something precious. Except he dreamed about her sometimes, and woke up feeling hollow. 6 weeks after Camille left his house, Raymond was leaving his night shift when a car pulled up beside him. Not the sleek black vehicle from before, but a modest sedan, something you'd barely notice. The window rolled down. Camille sat in the driver's seat, no makeup, hair in a simple ponytail, wearing jeans and a sweater. She looked nervous. "Hi," she said. Raymond felt his heart do something complicated in his chest. "Hi yourself. Thought you'd forgotten about us." "Never." Camille killed the engine, got out. They stood on the empty street at 2 in the morning, the same time they'd first met. "I wanted to come sooner, but things were crazy. And I didn't want to bring more cameras to your door. I waited until the media moved on to the next scandal." Raymond nodded. "I saw the news. You got your company back." "I did. Preston's going to prison for 10 years. The board apologized for ever doubting me. Blackwood Industries is stronger than ever." She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Everything I fought for, everything I wanted. I have it all." "But?" Raymond prompted. Camille looked down at her hands. But I realized something these past 6 weeks. I realized that having everything doesn't mean anything if you don't have people who matter. I have the company. I have the money, the reputation, the power. But I don't have what I had in your kitchen at midnight, drinking coffee and talking about real things. I don't have Zoe showing me her drawings. I don't have you reminding me what integrity looks like. Raymond felt something dangerous bloom in his chest. Hope. Camille, we live in different worlds. You know that. This isn't some fairy tale where the princess and the janitor ride off into the sunset. You have responsibilities, a position, a life I can't be part of. I know, she said quietly. But what if I don't want that life anymore? Or what if I want it, but I also want this? Want you and Zoe and quiet Sunday mornings and normal? What if I'm tired of pretending that money and power are enough? Raymond stepped closer. What are you saying? I'm saying I fell in love with you, Camille said, the words tumbling out in a rush. I fell in love with your daughter, with your life, with the way you see the world. I fell in love with the man who took in a stranger because it was the right thing to do, who makes pancakes at 6 in the morning, who works all night so his daughter can have breakfast. I fell in love with someone who doesn't care about my money or my name, who just saw me as a person who needed help. Tears were running down her face now. And I know that's insane. I know we barely know each other. I know this doesn't make sense on paper. But it makes sense to me, in a way nothing else ever has. Raymond reached up, wiped away her tears with his thumb. You're right. It doesn't make sense. You're Camille Blackwood, CEO of a billion-dollar empire. I'm Raymond Cole, night janitor who can barely pay rent. We shouldn't work. He paused, his hand still cupping her face. But when you were in my house, even with all the danger and the fear, something felt right, like pieces fitting together that I didn't know were broken. When you left, I told myself to let you go, that you'd forget about us as soon as you got back to your real life. But I couldn't forget about you either. Camille leaned into his hand, closed her eyes. So what do we do? I don't know, Raymond admitted. I have a daughter who's already lost her mother. I can't bring someone into her life unless I'm sure they're staying. I can't risk her heart like that. I understand. Camille opened her eyes, met his gaze. Give me a chance. Let me prove I'm not going anywhere. I don't need grand gestures or fairy tales. I just need time. Time to show you this isn't some fantasy for me. Time to show Zoe that I care about her, really care, not just playing house. Time to figure out how our worlds can fit together. Raymond thought about the risks, about the impossibility of it all, about every logical reason to say no. Then he thought about Zoe, asking when Camille would visit, about the empty space in their house that a stranger had filled for 4 days, about the loneliness he'd been carrying since Melanie died, that had lightened just a fraction when Camille sat at his kitchen table. Okay, he said. We go slow. We figure this out together. But Camille, I need you to understand. If this doesn't work, if you decide your world and mine are too different, you need to tell me before Zoe gets hurt. Can you promise me that? I promise, Camille said. And Raymond, I need you to understand something too. I'm not doing this as some rebellion against my life. I'm not trying to prove a point or play at being normal. I'm doing this because I genuinely believe you and Zoe are the best things that ever happened to me. I'm doing this because I want to. They stood there in the empty street, 2 people from impossible circumstances who'd found each other in the strangest way. Then Raymond did what he'd wanted to do since that moment in his kitchen. He kissed her. It wasn't dramatic or earth-shattering. It was gentle and uncertain and full of questions they didn't have answers to. When they pulled apart, Camille was smiling. Really smiling. The kind that transformed her entire face. So, she said, can I come over for breakfast? 2 months later, Camille had become a regular fixture in Raymond's life. She came over 3 mornings a week after his shift, made pancakes with Zoe while Raymond slept a few hours. She went to Zoe's school play and cheered louder than anyone. She hired Raymond a lawyer to review his employment contract and got him a raise that nearly doubled his salary. Not a handout, but leverage to negotiate what he was actually worth. She still ran Blackwood Industries, still attended board meetings, and managed a billion-dollar empire. But she did it in 5 days instead of 7. Weekends were for Raymond and Zoe. The media had moved on, but occasionally someone would recognize Camille at the grocery store or the park and whisper. Camille ignored them. She'd learned something from Raymond about not caring what other people thought. She'd restructured her life around what mattered, and what mattered was sitting at a scratched kitchen table eating slightly burned pancakes, listening to Zoe talk about her day at school. What mattered was Raymond's hand in hers as they walked through the park. What mattered was building something real instead of performing for cameras. One Sunday morning, Camille showed up with a box. "I have something for you two," she said, setting it on the table. Zoe bounced excitedly as Camille opened it to reveal a framed photograph. It showed the 3 of them at the park the week before. Raymond pushing Zoe on the swings, while Camille watched, all of them laughing. None of them had known Vivian was there with a camera, capturing the moment. "For your wall," Camille said softly, "with Melanie and all the other family photos. Because that's what we are now, right? Family." Raymond looked at the photo, at this woman who'd walked into his life as a stranger in a wedding dress and somehow become essential. He thought about all the reasons this shouldn't work, all the obstacles they still faced, all the uncertainty ahead. Then he thought about Zoe's happiness, about the light that had returned to his own life, about how sometimes the best things came from the most unexpected places. "Yeah," he said, pulling Camille close with one arm while Zoe hugged them both. "That's what we are. Family." The photo went up on the wall that afternoon, right next to the picture of Melanie holding baby Zoe. Raymond stood back, looking at his life displayed in frames, the past he'd loved and lost, the present he was building, the future that seemed possible now. Camille stood beside him, Zoe between them. "Thank you," Camille said quietly, "for taking a chance on someone who showed up uninvited in your bathroom." Raymond smiled. "Thank you for being brave enough to run, for trusting a stranger, for showing me and Zoe that the world's bigger than we thought." "So, what happens now?" Camille asked. Raymond thought about that, about Camille's apartment across town that she barely lived in anymore, about Zoe asking if Camille could read her bedtime stories, about the way this woman had somehow woven herself into the fabric of their lives until removing her would unravel everything. "Now," Raymond said, "now we keep going, one day at a time, building something that's ours." He looked at Camille, at this impossible woman who'd chosen his simple life over her complicated one. "Together." Camille kissed him, right there in front of the wall of photos, in front of Melanie's picture and Zoe's artwork and the evidence of the life they were creating. "Together," she agreed. And in that moment, standing in a small rental house with worn carpet and cracked tiles, Raymond Cole felt richer than any billionaire, because he had something money couldn't buy, a family built on choice instead of obligation, on love instead of calculation, on 2 broken people finding wholeness in each other. The bathroom light buzzed in the hallway, the same fluorescent fixture that had illuminated Camille's desperate face months ago. But now it just lit the way to an ordinary life, made extraordinary by the people living it. Sometimes the princess doesn't need rescuing by a prince. Sometimes she rescues herself and finds a janitor along the way. Sometimes the most valuable things in life show up when you least expect them, wearing a wedding dress and asking for help. Sometimes home isn't a place but a person, or two people who choose you as surely as you choose them. Raymond had opened his bathroom door and found a stranger. He'd opened his heart and found family. In the end, that made all the difference.